Hello, bravs. We're back with another book. Instead of completing the ones I started 6 months ago on this channel, I'm just going to continue to add new ones. Because why not? This one's obviously Trousered Apes by Duncan Williams. Sick literature in a sick society. I've perused this book before, but don't recall anything about it. I've seen a review on Goodreads that claims it's something that would be written by Rush Limbaugh as an anti-right denunciation of something or other that I don't recall, but I believe this book's from the 60s. Maybe I'm wrong. 71. This is the second printing, so I assume it's possibly from the 60s. Trousered Apes. Let's read the dust jacket. Forward by Malcolm Muggeridge. Anything Goes proclaimed a memorable Cole Porter song of the 30s, but sardonically, it remained. Here we go, my voice. Pardon. Most people would edit that out, but I mean, do you edit it out when you're reading and you mess it up or you drop your coffee? No, you just keep going. It remained for the savage 60s and the 670s to emancipate us to the level of Trousered Apes. I don't disagree with that. British professor Duncan Williams takes the view, lately unfashionable, that art can corrupt. The arts in general are not merely a mirror reflecting social and cultural values, but are, on the contrary, powerful forces which shape and mold the way in which people live and behave. Thus, the lurid themes that dominate literature and drama today, sadism, sodomy, the drug culture, barnyard sex, whoa, and the raw rendering of them work their poison into the social body. The result is animalism. Trousered Apes, we are teaching savagery, notes Professor Williams, and are naively appalled at the success of our instruction. With urbanity and easy learning, Professor Williams links today's Trousered Apes to their forebear, Rousseau's noble savage. 2 centuries of revolt against religion, reason, and order led us to Woodstock. In his provocative foreword, Malcolm Muggeridge traces the odyssey of this book in its British edition from underground to nomination among 1971's Book of the Year by 3 eminent London papers. The Sunday Times, The Observer, and the Sunday Telegraph. The book's message is at least as urgent for America. Please see inside of this jacket for a complete list of current... No, I'm not going to do that. The former owner was Paul J. Bonifant Jr. And I placed a tissue on this, or maybe it was there. Witty, erudite, passionately felt, a brilliant attack, and perhaps the beginning of a major argument of the 70s. Professor Williams, after closely studying contemporary developments in art and literature, observes and brilliantly describes the increasing predominance of an anti-civilizing trend closely linked to a cult of ugliness, a morbid concentration on the baser elements of life, a clinical obsession with the bizarre, with the grossly sensual and degrading aspects of human nature. Masterly analysis, Peregrine Woolshaw. That's a great name, Peregrine Woolshaw. Provocative and important new book, Peter Grosvenor. A powerful indictment of the arrogant primitivism which in fiction, the drama, and the popular art glorifies violence and animalism. A powerful analysis of the violence allied to triviality that characterizes so much of our contemporary society. The tablet. Acute in diagnosing and describing the malady. Michael Wharton. All right, I believe there's also a foreword. Let's look at the early pages. Paul J. Bonifant, I've said, Detroit, Michigan. Looked him up. I think he died 2002. And yes, I usually look up any name I find in a book that interests me just to see who they were. Provenance, I think we called it, Robs. Arlington House, New Rochelle, New York. Second printing, 1971, Churchill Press Limited. For Dominic, Rosamund, and Christopher. 8 chapters. I'm not going to read that. Oh, rascal Nicovian mind. Forward to the American issue. I was particularly delighted to hear that there was to be an American edition of Professor Duncan Williams's brilliant book, Trousered Apes, and particularly honored to be asked to provide the foreword. Here in England, the book began by being more or less bootlegged. Few reviewers noticed it. Of course, they're part of the Society of Degeneration. An honorable exception being C.P. Snow, who dealt with it at length. Bookshops didn't stock it. The trade and the literary establishment left it severely alone. The reason is obvious. Trousered Apes, the title is taken from C.S. Lewis, is a cogently argued, highly intelligent, and devastatingly effective anatomization of what passes for culture today, showing that it is nihilistic in purpose, ethically, and spiritually vacuous, and Gadarene, but I'm not sure of that, what that term is. I assume it's a person's name. Gadarene. In destination. In the frenzied pursuit of novelty in life as well as in art and literature, in the prevailing readiness to accept and then almost at once reject whatever is trendy, no matter how perverse or abnormal, Professor Williams sees the feverish attempts of a dying civilization to clutch onto a swiftly ebbing tide. He follows Leslie Fiedler in detecting in the West today a wariness with the striving to be men, the more desolating because, in this predicament, there is no turning to God, the news of whose death has permeated, secularized, and radically changed every aspect of Western thought and society. Such a theme presented with a great wealth of apposite, or is it apposite, illustration and force of argument was bound to appall the servants of the conventional wisdom, the media pundits and situational clergymen, the crazed professors and lib ladies, and Pulitzer Prize men and randy Catholic fathers who dominate the literary, artistic, and journalistic scene on both sides of the Atlantic, and who continue to propound the notion that change is progress, self-indulgence, liberation, and novelty, originality. Professor Williams's conclusion to them, anathema, is that we cannot live without God, and that when we try to, we are fated either to imagine ourselves to be gods and so able to shape our own destiny, flying like Icarus into the sun, or to relapse into carnality, seeking fulfillment through the senses, resorting to sex, drugs, and violence, and finding only satiety, fantasy, and despair, succumbing as what remains of Western civilization so evidently is to megalomania or erotomania, or both. I mean, I'm not religious in the least, but I do not disagree with these sentiments. Although I believe you can live without deity rather well, but society as a whole usually cannot because they're pieces of garbage. After the initial virtual boycott, little by little, word began to get around that Trousered Apes had something very important to say, and said it uncommonly well. It was exactly like the circulation of subversive writings in the USSR and other communist countries. A mention here, a nod, and a wink there, and the book began to move. It has gone on moving with increasing momentum ever since, without the slightest help from the Times literary supplement, the high-browed weeklies, the low-browed dailies, advertising, media exposure, or any other means whereby publishers reckon to promote their authors and their wares. However, it finally achieved the distinction of being nominated Book of the Year in the Lunday Sunday Times. We'll go with it. Sunday Telegraph and Observer. The same thing as I hope and believe will now happen in America, as discriminating, unbrainwashed minds get to hear that what Professor Williams has produced is no less than the historical, or is it historical, philosophical justification for Tom Wolfe's splendid assault on radical chic. I first heard of Trousered Apes from Christopher Booker, author of that climacteric book, The Neophiliacs, which is very much in Professor Williams's vein. Thenceforth, I became part of the human chain, passing it around, and in the process had the pleasure of meeting its author in person, who turned out to be a very charming, erudite, and intelligent academic. In a footnote in Trousered Apes, he recounts how he delivered a section of the book as a paper before a group of university teachers. When he had finished, a young lady of advanced liberal views came up to him and said, in all seriousness, "You're advocating censorship. You shouldn't be allowed to publish it." Ah, that is pretty brilliant. She spoke truer than perhaps she knew. But after all, the book has been published. Just how long this slender possibility of non-conforming with the non-conformist survives will, to a great extent, depend on the degree to which the case Professor Williams so ably presents it is understood and heeded. Malcolm Muggeridge. That's an English name if you ever had it. June 1972. How many introductions and prefaces are there? To recognize the truth in a book is always a joyful thing. Again and again, as I watch Professor Williams unfolding in this book the way that modern literature reflects the true cultural crisis of our times, I had that joy of recognition. And that is why I recommend his book with enthusiasm to all those who I know will enjoy it as much as I did. I believe we are living just now in a very exhilarating time. That it is also deeply disturbing, frightening, and confusing goes without saying. But in the past few years, for at least a sizable and growing minority, it has suddenly become much easier than ever before to grasp the true nature of our civilization's predicament. For several hundred years, we have, as a civilization, been traveling along a certain road, accumulating along the way a whole lot of assumptions about where we were going, which it has been very difficult to see through. We have all been conditioned to accept a certain view of progress, and now quite suddenly we are being emancipated from the vast deadweight of all those assumptions. We are finally face to face with the abyss to which that view of progress has led us, the prospect of a society not only threatened by nuclear war, by pollution, by overpopulation, but one in which men, depersonalized by their technology and their faith in science, have lost any sense of their own dignity or purpose. COVID. The 16th century historian Vasari observed that once human affairs began to deteriorate, no improvement is possible until the nadir has been reached. In a way, the wakening up of many people today is due to their sense that a nadir has been reached. Professor Williams's excellent and readable book is part of this waking up process, and as such, I hope it will reach a large number of people it didn't, who are similarly waking up they didn't, and who will be strengthened by it they aren't. Listen, the main problem is not so much that there's a sick society, but the uniformity in that society where every 20-year-old girl now has the septum ring in their nose. They wear a crop top. They have tattoos on the, whatever the fuck it's called right there, the underarm, your forearm, sleeves. And then you got all these Chumbawamba looking dudes who Look like they came out of some fucking not Charlie Brown, was it Scooby-Doo? They're, I don't know, it's just the uniformity of just nothingness. That's the weird part. We all got pink hair and blue hair, which is great, I guess. But what's it really mean? It means nothing. Anyways, let's go on. The essence of his purpose is to show through the mirror of modern literature, Dostoevsky, Camus, Jean Osborne, Jari, and a host of others splendidly documented what happens when men lose sight of the center. As in Yeats's celebrated lines, things fall apart. The center cannot hold. The trousered ape of the title is the last violent, neurotic hero who wanders through 1,000 modern plays and novels. The anti-hero, Taylor Swift's anti-hero, buddy, of our civilization, since Rousseau, 200 years ago, first glorified the noble savage. Freed from all the restraints of civilized social behavior, we have witnessed the gradual elevation into the center of the literary stage of the ignoble savage, post-civilized, as opposed to pre-civilized. Man increasingly bereft of a sense of purpose, of scale of value, of appreciation of order, harmony, and morality, reduced ultimately and inevitably to nothing more than his basic animal instincts. As Professor Williams shows, literature is not just an isolated thing, any more than the cinema, painting, or any other arts. These are not merely diversions, but true mirrors of the preoccupations of the times, in which men not only find what they think amusing or important, but also subconscious models for their own values and behavior. When men cease to aspire to the idea, the good, to self-restraint, whether in their arts or their lives, they do not just stand still, but actually turn the other way, finding self-fulfillment and self-indulgence, and in an obsession with those three ultimate expressions of the totally self-centered life: sex, violence, and insanity. Well, that is the road of which we have, in a sense, come to an end. You haven't seen nothing. I hope you didn't live to see all this. Christopher Booker. In the arts, at least, after the last 10 years, there is hopefully little further in degradation and meaninglessness to be explored, and that is one reason why, if we are intellectually and morally honest, we aren't. We are now able to look at the whole process of deterioration in some kind of perspective and admit that the rot did not just set in with O Calcutta or Waiting for Godot or even The Shadow of the H-Bomb, but long before any of these things, when men ceased collectively to look upwards and began to find significance only in the lowest common denominator of themselves. When did this falling off first show itself? Here, perhaps I would add my own qualification to Professor Williams's thesis, albeit one which follows agreement with almost every word he has written. Professor Williams seems to place his golden age, from which our present decline has taken place, in the classical ideas of the 18th century, in Pope, Dryden, Johnson, Jane Austen, and other writers, whom he quotes to great effect. But can we place even the first seeds of the ultimate decay as recently as the Enlightenment? What is the real cause of the predicament of modern man, which Professor Williams so brilliantly analyses? The ultimate answer implicit in his text must be that man has tried to stand on his own feet to find his ultimate significance in the material world, as I'm just pointing away from the book. Everything the professor describes is what follows when men lose sight of their eternal significance and of their dependence on God. And by a larger view, must we not agree that Western man has been collectively embarked on this adventure for longer than just the past 200 years? Certainly since, at the time of the Renaissance, it was once again proclaimed that man could become the measure of all things. Again and again, Professor Williams quotes those men who along the way have diagnosed the true nature of the disease. Yeats's lines, already quoted above, for one, and those from Pope's Duncan, which form the book's epigraph. Nevertheless, there are at least two other quotations which would not have been out of place, both of which also sum up the growing disease of Western civilization, even though they both come from much earlier than the 18th century. The first is Ulysses' famous speech from Troilus and Cressida, take but agree away, untune the stat string, and mark what discord follows. And the other, almost exactly contemporary, is from Donne's first anniversary, describing how, when men lose the sense of God and virtue, be more than man, or thou art less than an ant. Then inevitably, by degrees, does the world's whole frame fall out of joint, until finally it seems that the world becomes so sick that a hectic fever hath got hold of the whole substance, not to be controlled. Again and again, not just today, but all through history, we come back to the same problem. That when man loses the center, his life becomes meaningless, his world falls apart. It is true for individuals, it was true for the Roman world before us, but always the miracle remains that whatever happens to civilization as a whole, even if it seems by its defiance of God to be quite doomed, for each individual, the center and the truth are still there, to give sense and purpose back to it all. And that is something from which neither death nor life, nor things present nor things to come, can ever separate us. April 1971, Christopher Booker. I think the one thing I haven't seen so far is the overreach of government, but maybe that comes with it, because I don't think it's unconnected whatsoever, and it's mainly the overriding problem. Author's preface, and you'll hear people talk of anarchy, which is originally a socialist construct, I believe, but the anarchists of no laws, or what used to be a libertarian somewhat, and now is basically, in America at least, a libertarian is now like some cucked right-winger. But anyways, a libertarian of no laws doesn't mean no rules in that theoretical lawlessness. It just means one behaves of his own accord without harming others. Anyway, author's preface. This book has grown out of a paper delivered before a group of American university teachers of English in 1966. The ensuing discussion and controversy lasted well into the night and persuaded me that the subject demanded a more detailed examination. What an awful font this is. What is this, fucking Arial? I wonder if it shows it. I mean, it's just an awful font. I don't think it shows what the font is, but maybe it did in the beginning. Nothing that has happened since has changed my opinion that the Western world and its culture are saturated with violence and animalism. All who read newspapers or avant-garde novels or watch television news programs can glimpse the truth of this statement, but few seem aware of its underlying causes. To understand the true nature of the chronic upheaval which is engulfing our culture and indeed our entire civilization, we must look into the past and attempt to trace its genesis there. My inquiry has led me to many unpleasant truths, and I regret that much of what I have written may prove unpalatable to colleagues and writers whom I would not wish to hurt or defame. But I believe society confronts a crisis which can be arrested only if we grasp its nature and dimensions in an honest manner. I must not miss the opportunity of expressing heartfelt thanks to the following who encouraged me at various stages of bringing, and I'm not going to read their names. You can look at them. Even with such backing, I could not have reached this stage without support from Mrs. Pamela Kelsey, who uncomplainingly typed and retyped the manuscript, and my wife, whose patient understanding and encouragement made this book possible. Finally, I must thank Christopher Booker for writing an eloquent introduction that recalls the outstanding sensitivity and insight of his neophiliacs, which may yet prove a landmark in our return to a saner society. The Neophiliacs, a study of the revolution in English life in the 50s and 60s, published 1969 by William Collins and 1970 by Fontana Books. I probably should know who Christopher Booker is, but I just keep thinking of Christopher Hutchins, or Hutchins, whatever his name is. And that will lead us up to chapter 1, and I will leave the Pope poem for that such occasion. Take a look at the boards for true people, the true bibliophile. There's the spine, which is in my thrift store book adventures is very important. The spine of the book is one of the things I recognize for obvious reasons, because when you see the certain spine, you know it. And you never miss the books that you have grown accustomed to knowing by their design when searching for others. And in the case of with many books like this one, I have multiple copies. Unfortunately, the other copy that I have of this one smells like a Trousered Apes bunghole. Some kind of mold and mustiness. Indescribable, except to those who dwell in basements. Anyway, that's all, bruv. We shall return with chapter 1 next time. Goodbye. Goodbye.